Thanks for spending your afternoon here on WDAY Weather and Ag in Focus. Happy to have you joining. I'm Bridgette Readel, Ag Director, and just again, thrilled to have an opportunity to visit, see what you're up to today, and don't forget to send in those rain gauge totals. In fact, I got a chance to look at mine. I was at 1.8 inches of rain since last Friday. Now, unless anybody was toying with my rain gauge, as you heard us discuss on Monday. A new trick is to go out and dump water into each other's rain gauges. I think mine was being honest and legitimate at the 1.8, particularly when just to the northwest of me at Galesburg, North Dakota, they had 2 inches. I've heard also probably closer to that 2.8 inch mark down in the Sheldon and Leonard, North Dakota area over east of Harwood as we get closer to north of Glendon. They were also seeing well over 2 inches, so quite a bit of rainfall in the region in the last few days. But if you should decide that you want to share your rain total amounts, I'd be glad to have them. You can reach me on the the JLA insurance phone line, 701-293-9000. I'll take your emails, ag@flagfamily.com. And hopefully you're able to watch today on our live streams, which are on WDAY Weather and Ag in Focus, Facebook, YouTube, and Acres TV. Very excited that with Acres TV this later next week, I'll actually be in Baltic, South Dakota for Ag PhD Field Day, and that's tied in with Acres TV. So you're going to see a lot of content on that platform in regards to what people were doing down in Baltic on July 31st, all of the folks that were recording, showing off their company information, and so much more. So if you haven't downloaded that free app yet, you might want to consider it. Weather-wise, well, our weather is brought to us by Progressive Ag Risk Management Specialists, and weather-wise, we're shooting for a high of 82 today. Looks a little hazy out there. Some of that might be due to a bit higher humidity, but certainly smoke from Canada. And that's going to be a problem for a while. I think that we've pretty much seen it all summer long. Not a surprise. I have not been concerned about it affecting our crop at this point. That's probably a discussion to continue to have as we get closer to harvest, but I don't think we've lost too many GDUs to the smoke. We've probably lost more just to the fact that it hasn't been our warmest summer on record by any means. Now, when talking about the wildfire smoke, we certainly had our fair share of problems here in North Dakota last October when we also had wildfires. And we have some cattle out there that still have some scarring tissue in their lungs and potentially a higher disposition for pneumonia throughout the season. So there are some recommendations, not only for those cattle, but really any livestock with the smoke-induced air quality or wildfire-induced air quality challenges that are going on right now. First of all, if we're going to be working cattle, let's try to do that, or even if we're working with sheep, maybe with horses, let's do that on days where we have better air quality than others. It is helpful to not overwork animals when they have to do a lot of heavy breathing, when it's super hot and they're trying to catch their breath and they take in even more of the smoke. Remember, cattle don't sweat. They sort of pant. And one of the ways to help them do better in that hot weather is certainly plenty of fresh, cool water. And that also can just help soothe any irritation they might have in their throat. Use those low stress handling techniques when you are working with animals in some of these conditions, and also both for you and the livestock. Make sure that you're working in the early mornings, lower stressful times, cooler temperatures as well is a big deal. Now, if we can increase ventilation to any animals in a confinement operation, such as a hoop barn or monoslopes, that's very helpful as well in order to just give them a low stress environment. And keep watching. Look for potential concerns that they might have with respiratory distress, such as open mouth breathing, frothing, and again, give them plenty of space. If it's dusty in the pens, you can always water the pens down a little bit too. So just some ideas on how to take care of some of those critters on hot, smoky days that we seem to be having as of late. Now, we have had a story that's been running around as of late about cattle being killed by lightning. I believe that was in Tennessee. So what was the situation that happened? Well, from the looks of things, it's not a commonplace. It was in Kentucky, and there were about 14 head that were killed in the lightning strike. It was a very big strike, no less. And the cattle were huddled close to a tree. So that makes sense. If I have some really big old cottonwoods and or some old um, elm trees in the neighborhood, and could you put 14 head of cattle underneath them trying to get shade or protection in a storm? Maybe, but if they're smaller, if we're looking at yearlings or small calves, then I can easily see how 14 of them got around the base. And they don't even have to be underneath the canopy of the tree. When you have a lightning strike happen like that, it's bigger than you think. The ground acts as a conductor, and those animals could have been standing a little ways away from that lightning strike and still been affected. Now, thankfully, we have with us today our favorite vet from Ashley, North Dakota. That's Dr. Emily Fox. She'll be joining me in a little while. And that's a question that we can ask her about lightning strikes, their commonality when it comes to livestock, etc. I have an insurance agent in my family, and she would tell me it's not all that uncommon to have that kind of an injury or fatality with animals. When we've been talking about the weather, we're also talking about the higher humidity that's been happening. Folks are really worried about corn sweat. Look, I'll be honest with you. This isn't the first time. We have seen more and more humidity due to the corn evapotranspiration because we raise more acres of corn than we ever did before. Is it a bad thing? Well, it's not the heat, it's the humidity, right? That's our old wives' tale we always talk about. If we think it's bad here, I'm heading to Illinois on Monday, and let me tell you right now, I think it's going to be a whole lot worse down there. So yes, corn does respire. It does, in fact, add to the humidity in the air. I don't want to say that this is a bad thing at this point, but it's just a part of nature. What happens? It's what happens because we are raising those particular crops. In fact, corn being certainly one of the two top production crops in the U.S. We easily every year have over 90 million acres of corn or soybeans that are out there. So it's going to happen. I did laugh when I heard this story that said, don't worry, it's going to get better as the summer goes on. It will, because things are going to cool off and corn stops growing at a certain point where it prepares itself for harvest. That's when it changes. So it's just a matter of nature. Well, many things to talk about today, as always, besides what's going on in the livestock arena. Um, not everyone realizes that here in North Dakota, we have a farm management program that farmers can sign up for and can readily use. And this is called the North Dakota Farm Management Education Program. The program's actually been offered statewide in North Dakota since 1975, and the state legislature provides funding for it. What it is designed to do is to help anyone who is actively farming or ranching within the state. These coaches, if you will, work one-on-one with farm producers who are ages 18 and up. In fact, they have some folks that have been doing this for so long, they're in their 70s. And they use this as a sounding board and as a way to probably manage their finances, but just make some overall farm decisions a little bit better across their operation. Now, some people think that when you hear the word education, it means it's a class, but nope, not really. There can be special presentations that are offered, but this program operates through our 4 regional 2-year colleges in which there you can receive the tuition, which pays for instructors, but the learning really takes place in those one-on-one meetings with the instructors to the participants. You can enroll at any point in time during a production year, up to 2 semesters per year, and of course it is repeatable. Enrollment costs will vary depending on the college, so you're going to want to check that out if you are looking at someplace close to, say, Lake Region State College, etc. And the purpose is really to assist the farm clients in meeting their business and personal goals, helping to coach sound business decisions, gives training on individualized record keeping, helping you update record keeping if that needs to be the case. You can better prepare your financial statements and use them in your day-to-day management. When I was at the Bell Bank Ag Insights meeting on Monday, one of the things that was heavily emphasized by both speakers, well, one from Bell Bank, that was Lynn Paulson, Senior Vice President in Ag Finance, and then also retired Professor Emeritus Dr. David Cole from Virginia Tech. They said it's not just about having your annual cash flows. They recommend having your monthly cash flows. With where we are in the commodity market right now and the swings that we're seeing in fertilizer and inputs as we see rising costs, Monthly cash flows were heavily emphasized, and using this program with North Dakota Farm Management could help you assist in getting those accomplished and really analyzing your records to determine your financial strength or weaknesses at areas in which you can see improvement. So if you're looking for something like this program, well, you can always drop me that email, ag@flagfamily.com, and I am happy to share with you the sign up information, how to find it, and how to reach out to one of those regional colleges closest to you. Well, we're going to touch base with the market report on livestock from the American Ag Network, and then it certainly is Livestock Day. We'll be joined by Dr. Emily Fox of the Ashley Veterinarian Clinic. I have a list of questions for Dr. Emily that have come from you, our listeners, and then even just a few more from me, as well as the current headlines of what's happening in the livestock market across the globe. We'll be talking with her right after this. It's all about livestock today. And boy, if you haven't been out checking fences, what if you have cows out? Well, it's the same kind of assessment you have to do on your cybersecurity as well as your livestock security. So head on over to techsupportfarm.com. Check out the fence check assessment. It's a free assessment to see, do you have what you need or what more might be needed? So check it out. Again, techsupportfarm.com. techsupportfarm.com. Excited to have joining me today Dr. Emily Fox from the Ashley Veterinarian Clinic. All right, Emily, this is a shout out to your staff since you and I have started doing this show together. Your Facebook page, someone in your office has taken up some time and they are doing a great job. So please let them know how much fun it is to watch what's going on at the clinic these days.
Thank you so much. I know Megan will really appreciate that.
She's doing a nice job. I've been watching. Questions for you today. I have a whole list of them from listeners. So the first one is
Oh, goodness.
this was a list. Oh, yes. A listener in Minnesota noticed that driving past a small dairy farm, that the tails on the dairy cows were docked. Now, she was concerned that that was rather cruel because we all know that tails are used for fly control, etc., for dairy animals. Do you know why perhaps the tails were docked? I can only think that maybe so the farmer doesn't get swatted by them.
Sure. So I should preface this with I have never worked in the dairy industry. While I may be a bovine vet, I've worked on I could probably count the number of dairy cows that I've worked on in my career on my hands. So I'm
Okay.
certainly hardly an expert, and this is maybe something that would be a better question for somebody who knows more than I do. Essentially, I know that tail docking was common when I was growing up. I always saw it on some of the farms, like where I grew up in Vermont. It's not common in other countries. In fact, I believe in some countries it's actually banned or just really frowned upon. I know the AVMA, the American Veterinary Medical Association, has recently come out and said that they're not a big fan, but I don't know that all of the dairy organizations have. I'm not entirely sure. I know it's done generally for fly control, pest control, and also for cleanliness of milk, which makes sense, right? When you're, one thing that we don't think about is we can't really tell the cows, hey, we're about to milk you, hold your poop. And so it's important to keep the food supply. Obviously, it's important to keep the food supply safe. I would imagine this was a bigger deal back when people bucket milked more. Now we have we clean the udder and then we put usually an automatic milker on. And so everything's kind of a closed system. And I would imagine this may be a holdover from when people had an open bucket, a dirty tail would end
Hmm.
up, sloshing your bucket over, whatever. I don't see it very much in the limited dairy herds that I see. I know that we also see it in sheep and goats as well sometimes, particularly you see show sheep quite a bit with shorter tails and pigs. I know in those animals, there's also the issue of chewing on tails. We don't really see that in cattle because beef cattle usually have their whole tail, and I've never seen a lot of tail chewing. I have seen a lot of beef cattle freeze off their tail during the winter, which is a whole nother ball of wax. But generally, I see the tail as being a fairly beneficial part of the animal. I know a lot of dairies don't dock tails now. I know it's definitely not a universal practice, and there are some research papers that suggest that it actually did not increase cleanliness. But I believe the traditional reason is cleanliness.
You may not work with dairy herds all the time every day, but you've always got a really good common sense answer for us to think about. So I appreciate that tremendously because I would agree with you. It's probably something that hails from previous techniques when it came to milking those cows. Now, as I mentioned, often we think about the tails on the cattle, horses, etc., for fly control. But that was another question from a listener is what are the types of things that farmers and ranchers can do for fly control? And I often joke that you can put a garlic additive into the feed, and to me, that's just like pre-seasoning my prime rib. But what are some more common tactics that folks are doing?
Sure. So insect control is something that we deal with a lot because what most people don't realize is the way that we manage beef cattle in particular, we can't really handle them every day. If you have something like a closed system dairy where cows are coming in and out more or they're inside more, you can do things like applying topical things when they're leaving the parlor. You can have systems that, mist overhead. There's a lot of things you can do for animals that you see a lot, but at least for a lot of cows, you can't always get super close to them on pasture. Beef cattle are usually pastured this time of the year, and fly control is a major issue. The flies have been bad lately, and my own cows have been pretty sad some days. So there's a few different
Hmm.
options depending on your management style. First of all, we can talk about things you can do when they're in the chute. Usually, if we're ultrasounding, we're preg checking very early, and so there's some animals that we're seeing come through right now. I always tell people anytime you have an animal in the chute is a time to think about parasiticides because obviously there are best practices of times to put them on, but the reality is when we have contact with that animal is the best time to put them on generally. And so we see quite a few animals getting fly tags, like insecticide ear tags this time of the year. The tricky thing about those is a lot of people don't remove them after the end of the season, and there's some evidence that leaving them on until the level of insecticide drops to zero is really dangerous in terms of resistance. So it's not really the greatest thing, in my opinion, unless you're actually going to cut them out. And you need to rotate those products fairly frequently. The other thing is I've tried all different brands and they are just darn hard to put in, especially when we're putting an ear tag in the ear of an adult animal. They're all button tags, which is great. They stay in, but you go through so many buttons. They are so hard to put in. In fact, a lot of the time they're not
Mm.
sharp enough and we actually have to pre-punch a hole. They're really challenging to deal with. I remember I went to one appointment years ago where we were doing bulls in a chute with kind of a weird neck extender that went up like this, and every
Uh-huh.
bull, right after we semen tested and put the tag in, would pull his head back and remove at least one of the tags. And these tags aren't cheap.
Uh,
So we went through a
uh,
lot of tags and it was really frustrating. So there's some like logistical issues that I haven't quite worked out, at least with fly tags that I don't love, but fly tags are an option. Pour-ons are always an option. People always ask me, Emily, what's the best pour-on? And the reality is I think they're all really good until it rains a few times. I no
Right.
shout out to any particular brand. I have really good luck with Neogen's product, which is Standguard for summer for flies. That's what I use on my own cows. That one also shoots a long way, and my cows are super super tame. So sometimes we go out and we actually will kind of sprinkle it on like with a squirt gun, pretty much. And some of my cows will tolerate that. So if your cows are tame enough, you can do that. It works really well for somebody like me who has a bunch of pet cows. If you have a couple hundred cows that could get old pretty fast, but nothing seems to last more than a couple weeks that I've found. There's also some products like my business partner really likes BP 100 and he mixes it up in a few different ways, which is a different type of actually a natural insecticide, which is kind of interesting. I put that in some oilers sometimes. Oilers are great, like back rubbers and oilers. They're really great if the animals will use them. My animals seem to really like
Mm.
them. The only problem is they can get really, you have to put an oil carrier in them usually, and they can get really gummed up over time and not want to wick the oil down. And the other really big problem we have with them consistently is depending on what oil you use, they can make the identification ear tags people use illegible, which actually becomes a much bigger issue than people think. We've had issues where like people can't figure out a lot of information because of that. And we even had some people who said that
Sure.
the little strings from oilers get stuck in the ear tags and they really hate that. So I get why people might not want an oiler. Another thing that some of the most committed ranchers do, I don't do this, I wish I did. There are people who get a fogger and they'll put something, hopefully something not that harmful to human health or bee health, like a BP 100, in a fogger, and they'll actually drive around, drive through their cows and fog them. And the first time somebody told me that, I was like, don't they just run away? But actually, a lot of the cows get used to it. They know the fog is coming and then it makes them feel better. And a lot of the cows will allow you to drive around in fog. And that's a really good thing to either drive around and spray or drive around in fog while you're checking your animals if they'll allow it. But it's really hard. There's also some feed additives that you can put in your mineral products. Um, Everybody's got opinions on those. From my knowledge, there's not a lot of concrete data. You also do get some fly control from the deworming project. Long range, which is a long-term dewormer with a prenamectin, but it seems like in our experience, you get really good fly control for a couple of years and then it seems to wane. I don't know if there's some flies that maybe don't aren't as sensitive to it after a while, but that is another option some people really like. A lot of the yearling guys like it too because you do get a really, really good return on investment in terms of gain. So that is another option. But overall, fly control, one of the biggest things with fly control is people don't realize what a vector flies are for other problems this time of the year. Cattle stomping at flies constantly put cracks in their feet, then they run into the water to get away from the
Oh,
bugs, and then boom, you have a foot rot problem. Or flies are also a major spreader of things like pink eye. So if you have a lot of pink eye or you have a lot of foot rot, one of the things to consider other than your mineral problem is, do you need to do better with insect control? There's also fly predators, which are a parasitic wasp. Those are my favorite, but they don't work well for pastured cattle because they work better in a confined area. They're really good in feedlots. They're really good in your yard. I've used them several years in my own yard and noticed a real reduction in the flies, and they are fantastic. It's a very tiny parasitic wasp that comes in and eats the flies before they are born. And those are really, really valuable and utilized widely on feedlots now because they reduce the cost of parasiticides and they also reduce our chemical burden.
oh, that's a huge part is using those parasitic wasps because I can see that, we do it in the agronomy business as well, where we have natural predators to soybean aphids, right? We've got lacewings or Asian lady beetles that will eat that soybean aphid, so we don't have to use chemistry controls, just like you mentioned. So those are excellent points. Now, I've got more questions, and we're going to touch on those as soon as we return from our bottom of the hour news. Stay tuned for a continued discussion with Dr. Emily Fox of the Ashley Veterinary Clinic. Oh, if you are looking at how to mitigate risk on the farm, thinking about should I be trading commodities like corn, soybeans, using some of my forward contracts, etc., you might want to call the folks over at Progressive Ag. They are your risk management specialists. And after having toured Vision Ford in Wahpeton last week, I got to tell you, I think I might be sold on a Ford pickup next time. They bring in some fantastic options that fit our needs as farmers, and maybe you are looking for a quality used vehicle to send someone off to school this fall in college. Maybe mom or dad are retiring off the farm and need something different. Go talk to Ward at Vision Ford. My guest today is Dr. Emily Fox of the Ashley Veterinarian Clinic, and she is so kind to join me and go through the list of questions I get from listeners. And one of them stems just back a little bit. I think I got this question in June. Are we seeing an uptick in anthrax? We went from dry to wet spells, we were back to dry, and now we're getting rainfall again. Are you noticing anything in your practice with anthrax this year?
Sure. So I want to first talk about how uncommon anthrax is in general. Although there's not been a ton in this area historically, I'm not in a heavy anthrax area, and I've actually never diagnosed a case myself. I thought I had a
Okay.
case when I first started as a baby veterinarian, and it ended up being something else. That being said, we have had anthrax historically in this area, and I think a lot of the time it may not always get people may not always know that that's what happened. I know one of our other veterinarians diagnosed anthrax in a herd within our practice radius a couple years ago. So it definitely it happens, but I think maybe in this area it's not as common as people maybe think. So anthrax, we should back up and talk about what it is and why that's so important where you are. Anthrax is Bacillus anthracis. It's a spore forming style bacteria. And so essentially, it's one of these bacteria that is really, really good at almost acting like a fungus. If it encounters, if there's an anthrax infection and then the anthrax encounters conditions it knows it might kill it, it can actually sporulate and kind of go dormant for extended periods of time. Some people theorize like hundreds of years. I mean, it can really, really go dormant. And so
Oh,
essentially, if it hangs out in the soil or in an area and then suddenly becomes uncovered and conditions are good for it to do its thing, it will come back. There's a story I know, I don't know it as a veterinarian, I know it as a person, so it may not be as true. There's no papers on it or anything, but I know of a story in a town in Minnesota that I'm familiar with where they dug up an area where there was an anthrax outbreak like 80 years prior to build a new bridge, and suddenly some cattle in the adjacent pasture died and they think it was anthrax. So
oh,
it's one of these things that it can lay dormant for a really long time and then kind of come to the surface. So of course, times of serious erosion, right? We'll go back to college geology, like really dry, really wet, or my favorite, really wet, really dry, then really wet again, seems to really bring it out. And that's why it's a good question to ask now, considering we've had some uncharacteristic weather. Have we had an uptick in anthrax? I haven't seen any. I believe I haven't seen any releases from the North Dakota Veterinary Association saying that we have had any this year. Somebody could correct me if I'm wrong. I don't come from an area where there is anthrax originally. So anthrax is a west of the Mississippi thing. You don't really see it. I believe there
mhm,
hasn't been a case east of the Mississippi in a very, very long time. It is a really
sure.
serious disease. So most people remember anthrax from the anthrax scare, post 9/11 that we had in this country where people were weaponizing anthrax. Weaponized anthrax is a little bit different because they're trying to get it to spread in the air. Anthrax can spread in the air, and ingested anthrax, eating it, or inhaled anthrax are incredibly serious. Anthrax is always serious, but luckily over 95% of human cases are what are called cutaneous anthrax. It's on your skin. It definitely needs to be treated, but you have quite a bit more time and there is quite a bit more recourse, is my understanding, although I'm not a human doctor. One of the most important things is if you're having sudden death in animals, particularly with a lot of bleeding from the nose or any orifices that does not seem to be clotting, which is a major hallmark of anthrax blood. It doesn't want to clot because of the bacilli in there.
Mhm,
If you're seeing that, certainly that's something where you want to call your vet. And if a vet sees that, we're going to call the state immediately because it is reportable and quarantinable. The main thing is how to dispose of the bodies, right? Because we want to make sure that that anthrax doesn't sporulate and stay in our environment. So
mhm,
that's the main thing is that, if we're having sudden death, if we don't know why, usually you don't see an outbreak of anthrax that only affects, say, one animal, right? It's going to be several animals within a group. And so if we're seeing a whole bunch of animals that die suddenly, we don't know why, it should always be on our differential list. We should talk about it. There is a vaccine, and some people vaccinate for anthrax. People always ask me if they should. I'm a big fan of vaccination and preventative care. I also understand there is a bottom line and also there is some negative effect of vaccinating for everything all of the time. You can only give so many vaccines at a time, in my opinion. So I usually do it risk
mhm.
based. I ask, do we know of any even history, lore from your grandfather, old neighbors that have said anything about back in my day? Do we know anything about this area? Has there ever been anthrax? If there's ever even been suspected anthrax in the area, I generally recommend vaccination. If there hasn't, usually I know enough about my practice radius, even if the client doesn't know, I have an idea. Certainly it's something that we talk about. And certainly there's a good vaccine out there. Colorado Serum makes a vaccine. I think there might be one or two other companies that do. Um, the other thing to consider with potential anthrax exposure is, really be conscientious of how you dispose of dead animals in general, particularly when you don't know why they died, making sure that we're not, say, leaving dead animals out where they're going to stay on the pasture or something. That's really important in terms of making sure things like this don't spread. But it's definitely reportable. It's really important to be conscientious of, and certainly something that you should be visiting with your vet about. And in general, as a veterinarian, if any of my clients have multiple animals that die and we don't know why, I really want to know why for the sake of my clients. So
Mm.
please, please call your veterinarian.
So that kind of leads to the next question. There's been a story floating around as of late about 14 head of cattle that were killed in Kentucky by a lightning strike. And is it very common? And are there specific postmortem symptomology, I guess, that you would look for that would designate whether or not it was a lightning strike that might have killed an animal out on pasture?
Sure. So lightning strikes are very common. In fact, I've had an unlucky friend who lost multiple animals to lightning strike in 1 year. It definitely does happen. We've had a lot of lightning down here, and we've done several lightning claims recently because, of course, insurance can get complicated with lightning. So first of all, in terms of pathologic lesions for lightning, it depends on who you ask, and it's kind of debated amongst veterinarians. Some of my colleagues would say that sometimes there's a little bit of a difference in how much blood is in the heart or the appearance of the heart. I haven't necessarily found that to be true. So if I am doing a lightning claim necropsy, sometimes the insurance company will require a necropsy or an animal autopsy. Sometimes they will just say, you know what, there's lightning in the area at that time period. We're going to pay out and consider this, what it is. That's up to the insurance company. I have little to do with it. A lot of the time, by the time people find them, there's not going to be any lesions because the insect activity this time of the year is it, and the bacterial activity makes it pretty hard. However, if I get one that we think is fairly fresh, the first thing that I do is I prove that nothing else killed the animal and that it was healthy until it died, right? Because there's not that many causes of sudden death. Like we said, really animals shouldn't just be fine and then the next day have passed like that. And so things that I look for are, looking in the chest cavity, making sure there's no evidence of an ongoing pneumonia, looking for anything else that might have killed this animal. And I'll usually write in my insurance claim, I can't prove that lightning struck this animal. I wasn't there. But what I can prove is that there's not really any other good cause of death that I can find. And a lot of the time, that's what I'm doing. The other thing is every once in a while, somebody will talk about one where the hooves got blown off or something really looked obvious, or you could see signs of a lightning strike in the area. I only had that happen once where I clearly saw that like a hoof was off and there was like a kind of smoky area around where it like looked like the grass might have been on fire. But that's incredibly rare. I rarely get that lucky. The other thing I look at is the topography of where the animal was. A lot of the time these animals are on the top of a hill or in a kind of high water source. I had one last year where unfortunately they didn't find it until it was too late to necropsy or autopsy this animal. But what we did find is it was in kind of a high area and then right in the middle of water. And I think this animal had been out in the lake and the lake probably got struck. So those are the type of things we'd look for, but a lot of the time there's not specific pathognomonic lesions that are, oh, this is definitely lightning.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a little bit of livestock CSI, trying to determine what may have happened when you're not there with it.
Yes, I think necropsies are really undervalued in animals, both in small and large animal. It's actually something that I enjoy doing, not for the sake of because I really enjoy getting that dirty and that smelly sometimes, but what I really do admire about it is that you get so much information. There have been so many times where I've brought peace to somebody that they couldn't have done more, especially when it's a small animal and somebody requests a necropsy, and I can say this wasn't your fault. This wasn't something that you
Mm.
missed. This wasn't something that you should have done differently. This was inevitable. Or if we're trying on the large animal side, if we're trying to make sure that we don't have something that's going to keep spreading within a herd, if we think it's lightning, but we've had a whole bunch of them recently or something, it's worth looking into because I want to make sure we don't actually have something contagious that we're just assuming is lightning. Sometimes, Occam's razor, right? The concept that the simplest answer is often the best or the most likely is a great idea, but we also need to make sure that we don't get into tunnel vision and assume that we have one thing going on when we have something else going on. And so I think the type of information that we glean from necropsy is incredibly valuable to me, and definitely something that if you've had multiple deaths, I want to be doing a necropsy generally.
That makes great sense. So, last question, and this is not only from a listener, but also from myself. Um, how's everybody at the vet clinic these days? It's not as though you have any downtime during the year. Things just continue to go, and hopefully, you're all doing well because I know that large animal vet burnout is real. And just wanted to see if everybody's doing okay within your practice.
We have been doing pretty well. I think some of us have been more burnt out than others. It's really hit and miss this time of the year. So, we had one veterinarian who had zero emergencies during her on-call weekend. And then the next weekend, we had a veterinarian who was busy all day, every day with emergencies, and then the veterinarian the weekend after had nothing. And I don't think this is just that one veterinarian has bad karma or something. I think sometimes things just, this time of the year, it's not as regular as calving season where we know, like, yeah, I'm probably going to get an average of X many calls per weekend. It seems like really random things just kind of happen sometimes. It's the time of the year when we're dealing with a lot of, we're seeing small animals that are sometimes heat stressed, cats and dogs, especially dogs. We're seeing animals that maybe have gotten into things. People are outside with their dogs a lot more. We're also seeing some cattle stuff, a lot of, the later baby calves that are out on pasture. Sometimes we don't notice things right away, and then we're like, oh no, he has a hernia or something to that effect. And we've also had some weird stuff. In addition, we're starting our ultrasound season. One of my clients is one of our earliest clients. So I've been doing a little bit more than some of the other doctors, but we've been ultrasounding a fair amount lately, and we're starting a lot more in the next week or two. So with ultrasound, we're doing generally pregnancies that are anywhere from 30 to 90 days that we're looking at. So we're doing a lot of these animals on pasture that people round them up, and then we take fetal age and sex measurements. And if you want to see some really cool footage of me doing that, Megan has graciously done a really cool, I think it's like a Facebook reel or a Facebook video uh,
Yes.
of this. So you're welcome to check out our Facebook page and see what it is that we do. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them the next time I'm on.
That is perfect because I love the fact that folks do send me questions and then I just hang on to those until you and I get together so I can put the whole list in front of us and answer them just like we did. So, Dr. Fox, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Well, folks, don't go anywhere. We do want to finish up with some headlines and another check of the weather because as I listen outside of my headset, that's either rain or someone's popping popcorn in my attic. So, I'll fill you in after this. That was indeed rainfall outside my window. No one was popping popcorn in the attic. Just one of those short little bursts of showers that passed through. I think there may happen from time to time. Throughout the rest of the week, looks like we have a short chance of showers on Saturday, but a much bigger chance on Sunday. Temperatures today, we're looking to top out at around 82 degrees. Our evening lows for the solid next week look to be in the 60s, and our weekend will certainly be nice and warm in the upper 80s, again with that chance of rain on Sunday. So keep that in mind as you get ready to do your weekend plans. Well, okay, so Addison, our sound engineer, is back for the week. And Addison, before I launch into this, I just want to ask, have you had a chance to finish your lunch yet?
Well, you've got me worried, but yes.
Okay. I'm sorry to make you worried. I did not bring this up with Dr. Fox, even though I could have. She has helped answer questions before when we first heard the discussion about the New World screwworm. And I did this on a morning show this morning. I was talking about it and said, "Oh, are we?" And the host said, "Well, are we still talking about that?" The fact of the matter is, we're going to be talking about the New World screwworm for quite a while. The same way that the HPAI virus in the bird flu has not gone away in poultry, but we have learned to manage that better. We still have a respiratory virus in hogs. It's PRRS, and so those things are still out there and happening. We just hear about them because there's a new exciting topic to talk about. And right now, New World Screwworm is going to be one that we're going to talk about for a while. Now, the state of Texas has decided they really need to help ramp up their efforts. And what they are doing is working with the Department of Agriculture to release what they are calling is a swarm lure. It is a synthetic bait designed to attract the adult screwworm flies, and it could be effective in helping to eradicate the screwworm. Now, we had the screwworm that was coming into the U.S. in the 1960s. We managed to push it all the way back down into Panama and further south, but it is moving its way north. What's the screwworm? It is actually starting out as a fly that lays its larvae on any potential open wound on an animal, any warm-blooded animal, cattle, deer, sheep, etc. When I say open wound, this can be anything as small as a vaccination puncture to a scrape that happened from a nail in a wooden fence post. What do the ranchers in Panama caution us about as what could be happening? Well, this fly will lay its larvae in the healthy flesh of an animal, and literally it can eat a calf alive in 48 hours. That is how prolific the larvae are. That fly can lay 300 eggs. Those larvae can attack. So new calves, recently calved out cows who may have any open wounds are just sitting ducks for this to happen. They describe it as a smell that you'll notice that's sort of a roadkill crossed with infection before you might even notice that the larvae are not just moving on top of the skin, but under the flesh. And at that point, you're going to have to do a couple of things. One, if you're trying to brand or dehorn, you need to put insecticides on the open wounds. And oftentimes, you're going to have to try to cut that flesh and that larvae out of the animal. So we're going to keep a close eye on this for a long time. Unfortunately, it's a fly and it's hard to keep away. Stay tuned, though. The Jay Thomas Show is coming up next, and maybe they have something less disgusting to talk about. Well, leave it to me to bring up the bad ones, but you can always let me know what your questions are. Have a great day.